He's known by 3 letters, BTK, bind, torture, kill. The notorious serial killer terrorized America's heartland and murdered 10 innocent people. Dennis Rader was living a double life as a soft-spoken family man and church leader. And he's been right to me from prison. Lots of insights here, because we have these letters today. What do they reveal about his psyche? And his daughter Carrie is here, finally opening up years after learning the truth about the man she thought was a loving father.
For over 30 years, the area surrounding Wichita, Kansas lived under the dark specter of a serial killer. One who taunted authorities with poems, depictions, and clues boasting of his twisted murders, bearing his sadistic signature, BTK, bind, torture, kill. His reign of terror began January 15, 1974, the day 15-year-old Charlie Otero returned home from school, moments after his brother Danny, 14, and sister Carmen, 13, to discover unspeakable horror. Alerted by Carmen's screams, Charlie would find his parents, 38-year-old Joseph and 34-year-old Julie, bound with rope, suffocated, and strangled to death in their bedroom. Charlie tried frantically to revive them. Finding the house phone dead, Danny ran to a neighbor for help. Responding officers would find the 3 eldest Otero children sobbing on the front lawn of their home. Inside, they would later find their little brother, 9-year-old Joseph Jr., bound and asphyxiated in his bedroom. Their 11-year-old sister Josie would be found hanging from a pipe, bound and partially clothed in the basement. Their brutal, senseless, and sickening murders would send shockwaves through the quiet Midwestern community. They would be the first in a series of 10 unsolved murders that would torment the area and authorities for more than 3 decades, as the killer played a twisted cat-and-mouse game with the media and law enforcement, before finally falling prey to his depraved desire to be acknowledged for his murders, when a floppy disk would link the killer to his crimes in 2005. The suspect would be shocking. Dennis Rader, an Air Force veteran and family man, known for his role as a church and Cub Scout leader. The accusation would blindside his wife of 34 years, their grown son, and their daughter, Carrie. In court, Rader's gruesome recounting of his killings would further devastate the families of his victims and his own. Today, Rader is serving consecutive life sentences in prison, but the daughter he raised continues to struggle with the reality that the father she thought she knew, she now knows as a serial killer.
Dennis Rader's daughter, Carrie Rawson, joins me now. I know this is difficult to go through, and I appreciate you coming on here and talking honestly about your dad and your relationship with him. What kinds of thoughts keep you up at night when you think about Dennis Rader?
Since the arrest 14 years ago, I mean, in the initial just running it through my head, trying to figure out, was this true, and could he have really committed these crimes? You know, and who was the man that raised me? Like now, I still have night terrors.
What happens during your night terrors?
So it's usually I fall asleep too quick, you know, or I'm very tired, and then within like 30 minutes to an hour, I'll wake up screaming full on, waking up the house. I always think there's somebody in my room there, in my bedroom, there to hurt me, and it's like I'm trying to fight them off.
Let's unwrap this a little bit. By the way, night terrors are pretty common for kids to have.
Right.
Probably 40% of kids have them. Your autopilot just goes crazy. It's wired to relax at night, but yours doesn't. Therapy actually does work oftentimes for it, but ultimately you got to deal with the demons.
Right.
Some of the ones that may be left behind from the interactions with your dad. How would you describe what kind of a person he was? He's been labeled a serial killer, right? But that's not how you probably saw him.
No. He was a pretty much good dad most of the time. Like, we camped and we fished. He was basically my best friend, my buddy. We would walk the dog together. That was just something I did with him. Garden, we built tree houses. We would run to the hardware store. He didn't just do things with you, he taught you. So he taught me about the outdoors. He taught me how to plant a garden. He taught me how to fish. And I was very, very close to him all up until the day of his arrest. But there was also that other side of like occasional anger in our houses, flashes of eruption, you know, like you were scared sometimes of who was home and what he would do. He was like, could undercut you with abuse, emotional abuse too.
Did he ever physically hit anything that you ever saw, you, a pet?
He did not ever hit me, but my mom had made this wonderful like dinner of manicotti, and we got into this fight on the table, and my dad like leaped out of his chair and grabbed my brother and put his hands around my brother's neck like from the front and started to try to strangle my brother at dinner. And when my dad did that, it was like it wasn't my dad for a second. His face changed. It was like full of rage and cold, and his eyes would narrow. And then when we pushed him off, his shoulders slumped, and you could tell he felt sorry and realized what he had done, you know. But honestly, like that happened one more time a few years later, but I don't ever remember talking about it with my family after that.
Just to put it in context, your father had actually murdered people before you were even born.
Right, he committed 7 murders, including a family of 4, orphaning 3 older kids.
The Otero
in 74,
family.
the Otero family. And then after the Oteros, he murdered Catherine Bright, who was young, over by the WSU campus, the college campus in 74. Then he stopped. Then my brother was born. Then in 77, he murdered Shirley Vianne Ralford. She was a mom, and he murdered her in front of her children. He locked him in a bathroom. Then in 77, when my mom was pregnant, she was 3 months pregnant with me, he murdered Nancy Fox. And I found out in therapy in 15 that when he murdered Nancy Fox, he took his belt off and strangled her with his belt. I in therapy then working through, like, she took me back to that. And I remembered when I was 4, Dad had taken his belt off and threatened me, and I could still see him loomed in the hallway with a light behind him, snapping that belt at me. And I had completely suppressed that. And then when I realized what he had done to Nancy, like, the therapist said that was a major breakthrough to like pull that back out and have that in the open and put it in place.
There are these isolated moments, many of them you've obscured, you've blinded yourself to. A lot of us do that in our lives. We forget the harmful things we've experienced. So if you didn't know that your father was a serial murderer, what would you say you loved the most about him?
Just that he would spend time with you, and he was kind, and like he loved you, and like he would go to any effort to take care of you. So when I was in college, I was 2 hours away, and I didn't have a car. So he was the guy that would drive after work on Fridays and come get me. The man everybody knows after 05 doesn't match my father at all. You know, like when he was arrested, I tried to alibi him and say, like, you got the wrong guy. Like, you know, he's a church leader, Boy Scout leader, a really good dad, except, you know, for a few incidents, you know, and nobody would believe me. And my mom said the same thing. Like, she was sitting there with the police on the day of his arrest saying, you've got the wrong man. You know, all my family told him that too, but, you know, and then you come to find out, like, you never knew that person, you know. But nowadays I try to tell people, like, the only man I know is my dad, and that's why I still love my dad, because I have to hold on to that or I'm gonna die, or I would be dead, you know. And so I don't know BTK. It's taken 10 years in and out of therapy to even be able to say BTK or look you in the eyes and say that and sit here and talk to you. That's why I've never done media before, because I wouldn't have been able to handle it. So people think I'm crazy that I still love my dad, but I don't know anybody else. That's the only person I know.
You know, I think you're very brave for telling your truth. And don't let anyone take that away from you. It's not your fault your dad did what he did. So when we come back, the moment 6-year-old Carrie realized a murder in her town would change her life forever. We'll be right back. We're back with serial killer BTK's daughter, Carrie Rawson. So when he was terrorizing that Kansas town, you were there.
Right.
Were you fearful as you heard about these crimes, not knowing it was your own father in your own house?
Well, in 85, I was 6 years old, and our neighbor, Maureen Hedge, she went missing. And 10 days later, they found her body strangled out in the country a few miles east of our church. Somehow, at 6 years old, I knew she had been abducted, and I knew she had been murdered and strangled. And a 6-year-old shouldn't know that.
Did your father know you were scared about?
He did, and I didn't know he knew I was scared until I read it in Ramsland's book, and he said it worried him that, like, the murder of Mrs. Hedge was affecting me,
Even though he had done
He
the
had
murder.
done the murder, but he also got off on it.
Got off.
Like narcissist, like sexual sadistic high. That's what he is. This is a sexual sadistic psychopath. So he's basically getting a power trip because his daughter's now got trauma in her house. So I'm 6. I knew Dad was gone that night because I knew he was at a scout camp out, and I had slept with my mom because I was scared because we had a thunderstorm. I knew that at 6. Then when the police come in 2005 to my house, the FBI, they're telling me, and I'm like, no, you've got the wrong guy. And I said, what are the dates? Then I remember Mrs. Hedge. My guts just sear in half. And that was like that first moment that, oh my God, I think my dad murdered Mrs. Hedge. And then it came to find out, like a few hours later, my dad confessed to Mrs. Hedge.
When you learned that your father had confessed, how did that affect you?
You know, I'm so out of it. I'm physical shock for 5 days. I'm shaking. Come to find out, my dad had taken jewelry and driver's license from his victims, and he had hid them in a false bottom space underneath our catch-all in the hallway where we rode out tornadoes. So, I mean, our 3 bedrooms were there, and the bathroom was a small 3-bedroom ranch. So you're walking past where this evidence is for 26 years of your life. And like, I think the FBI knew to tell us that so we would know it was real. So my family knew quite a bit more before the public did. So we knew very early on my dad was guilty. And so then we spent months writing my dad, trying to convince him to plead guilty. You know, I'm like, you know you're guilty, tell him you're guilty, like save the victim's family, save the community, save our family from like millions of dollars and 2 years of trial, which you see what Golden State's going through right now. Yeah. Like just take the plea.
Up next, the day Carrie will never forget. She's taking us back to the moment she realized her father was a serial killer terrorizing their town, and how her DNA helped put him behind bars. Don't go away.
For decades, the BTK killer had toyed with the Wichita, Kansas police task force trying to catch him, sending them taunting letters, twisted clues, and even asking advice as to whether a floppy disk could be traced to a particular computer. Rader believed the lieutenant who claimed it couldn't. It could. And when BTK sent a floppy disk to a local television station, it was quickly linked to a computer at Dennis Rader's church. But DNA testing would link him to his killings. Prosecutors subpoenaed a tissue sample from a pap smear done on Rader's daughter Carrie at a student clinic near Kansas State University, which she had attended 5 years earlier. DNA tests on that sample matched DNA collected at BTK's first murders more than 30 years ago. It showed beyond doubt that Carrie Rader was related to BTK, that the man responsible for the brutal murders of at least 10 people was her father.
We're back with serial killer BTK's daughter, Carrie Rawson. So it was your DNA that helped put your father behind bars. Mm-hmm. Were you aware that your DNA was being used?
No. When the FBI agent knocked on my door on February 25th, 05, I was still even in my pajamas. And the FBI agent is dropping like the bombshell of bombshells on me in my kitchen, telling me, he's like, your dad is BTK. Like, he just dropped it like that. So we talked for about an hour, and then we got up to leave, and the agent says, well, we need your DNA to match it to some things. And I was like, what things? And he's like, evidence. And he didn't know how to collect DNA. And I said, you know what? Well, on CSI, like, they grab swabs and swab. I literally said that, like, swab your mouth. So we grabbed Q-tips and swabbed my mouth. And I was like the one that told him how to do it.
This is so bizarre. Now, they had actually...
They had already taken my DNA. So then I think...
You had a pap smear.
Right.
They had actually subpoenaed the pap smear, which I didn't know they could do, but without your knowledge. Mm-hmm. And they got the DNA from that, and that's how they figured this out. The swab, I guess, was to confirm that.
I think it was also to kind of cover their rears. Like just in case.
In case it wasn't allowed to be used in court.
Exactly. And so then that was Friday, and on Saturday night, CNN ran an article that said I had turned in my father and I had given blood. And I knew those two things were wrong. I was very angry and I felt betrayed because my father had betrayed me. These institutions that I loved and adored. My father had betrayed me. Now a few weeks, the media was betraying me, an institution that I loved, journalism. I love journalism. Now they're stalking me. So I'm betrayed by the media. So I wanted to make sure people understood at that time that's how I felt. And it took 10 years before I was able to talk to a journalist and not be angry.
I'm glad you're not angry today and talking to me about stuff that matters a lot.
Right.
When was the last time you saw your father?
2004 in December, we were home for Christmas. And so Dad came out of the bathroom. He was in his brown compliance uniform. He looks like a county sheriff. He's all got his belt on and his gear and his nightstick. He's like way overdone for his compliance job. And I hugged him. He smelled like Old Spice. He hugged me really tight. He said, I love you, which he hardly ever said, rarely ever was affectionate verbally. He said, I love you and I'll see you soon, because they were going to come up and see us again. And I said, I love you and I'll see you soon. And that was it, he was gone. And so, in 2005, when I knew I was never going to see him again, even though I was falling apart, I knew to seal that memory tight. I knew to go back and try to remember like how he smelled, how he felt. And I can like still feel him today, because I'm never going to have that again. And people are knocking me still. Like they're saying, you don't have the right to talk about him. You don't have the right to suffer. You didn't lose anything. He's a monster. You don't have the right to talk. You don't have the right to write. You don't have the right to grieve. And I would never say that to anybody about anything. You know, I lost the man that I loved. I lost this massively important person in my life, and he was taken away. And I was never allowed to grieve, because how do you have a funeral for someone that's still alive? And how do you grieve publicly for somebody that everybody hates? You know, so what do? You gather up with the people you know, your family, and you try to hold on and survive. Because, I mean, you're not allowed to do it publicly, you know? And people are like, you shouldn't have wrote about that good, decent man. And I said, I had to write about the good, decent man. I had to find him again. I spent years going back in those memories to find him again, because I needed to find my dad before I could write about BTK.
Writing books is often therapeutic, it's cathartic. If you're okay with this, I'd like you to read an excerpt from something you wrote.
Dear Carrie, I'm starting to enter a phase in life that Mom may not accept me, and her loyalty is beginning to weaken. I sent her a birthday card, Mother's Day card, and no letter or thanks. Her last letter was a month ago. Do you think I should still write? It hurts to write and not get any reflection.
You write, you say that those letters anger you. But what angers you the most?
I mean, the letters anger me because you see the narcissism, and I never saw it before 2005. You see it's about him, and why aren't people calling me? Why aren't people visiting me? Why aren't you, supporting me in my time of need in the prison, which, I'm sitting here trying not to roll my eyes. What really angers me are like that public perception that my family was culpable and that we were hiding something. And we've always said that if we had any inkling he had harmed someone, let alone murdered anyone, we would have gone screaming out that door to the police. You don't sit down with a man and serve him manicotti if you think he's murdered, like even harmed someone. Right. And at the very most, when I shared about him hurting my brother, like we thought that was the whole iceberg. We didn't realize it was the very tip, and that there was psychosis underneath it, right? The other thing that angers me is that my dad now tries to throw like his mother, my grandma Dorothea, under the bus. Like blames her for something wrong with my dad. My grandma Dorothea and his dad, my grandpa Bill, were the most amazing people.
It's very brave for you to talk about this, probably painful as well. What is your hope? What is your goal coming public for the first time the way you are?
I realized for 10 years, I prayed to God and I said, I want a quiet, peaceful life. I want the media to go away. I want to be left alone. And God granted that. The problem is all of that suffering, pain, everything I'm telling you about, times 1,000 embedded in me, and it was rotting inside me. So it wasn't until after I forgave my dad, I started to come back to myself in 2012, and I forgave him for what he had done to me, the betrayal. Not for the crimes, those are not mine, those are the family's to forgive. I forgave him for what he did in my family. Writing, that's how I heal. So I went and did it to heal, and then a lot of people reached out as soon as I started talking and saying, you're helping us. Like abuse victims, crime victims, people with criminals in their family, war veterans with PTSD. They were privately reaching out and saying something in your story is positively helping us with our own trauma. And after this book came out a week ago, I am flooded with messages of people saying, you're helping us heal.
Well, I think you did that today. I thank you for coming on.
Thanks.
You stay strong.
Okay.
No matter what.
Okay.
You can find Carrie's book, A Serial Killer's Daughter. It's available now.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.